Good afternoon and welcome to our session Accelerating, Futureproofing and Embedding Change with Compassion. I'm delighted to welcome our guest speaker today, Toni McLelland. Toni will be joining me on screen in just a second. Hi, Toni. Hello, welcome. So Toni is director of First Life Group, critical friend and business mentor, and Queen of Compassion. So Toni splits her time between London and Wales, where she acts as a critical friend, a business mentor, and she really is an inspirational people leader, one that passionately navigates C-suite and board members through individual business challenges, crisis, change management, and to really help future-proof and bring sustainability in business. Toni specialises in social impact, social justice, and social mobility, and has 30 years of experience in senior positions in central government, Ministry of Justice, and the Home Office. So really, everything that Toni does is underpinned by diversity, equity, inclusion, and very importantly, belonging. So Toni is going to take us through a session today where we're going to really look at compassion from an organizational point on an individual leadership point of view. So Toni is very much a distributor of fairy dust, and as I've already said, Queen of Compassion. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Toni. But before I do that, please can I say that we've got a chat facility on both YouTube and Facebook. We can collect those comments and feed them directly to Toni. So throughout the session, please do use that. And Toni will be prompting you at certain points in terms of asking questions or making comments. So that's all for me for now. Toni, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And I just want to say what fantastic work KaiTeg have been doing with Agile Nations. And it's an absolute pleasure to be able to be here, spending this time with you all to share my knowledge and my experience around compassion. So let's move through. What is compassion? There's a little bit of background about me, and really what it does is it gives you some context. My background is in criminal justice, specialist education and care, and what that means is that I'm interested in people, not only behaviour, but the learning, environmental factors, and I've spent a long time, over 30 years in this industry, really looking at human behaviours and studying and what really works. So let's think about compassion. Compassion, what is compassion? It's relieving the suffering of others while moving to action. It's very much action orientated. So it's not sympathy, empathy, or pity. We move to action, relieving the suffering of others by moving to action. It's not just others either. As you'll hear, as I go through and we talk about compassionate organizations, it's also about the planet and being considerate to that too. So there's a little context in terms of what compassion is. So why compassion for me? Why am I on this compassion mission? Well, I can tell you that over the 30 years of my experience in criminal justice, specialist education and care, and even whilst managing critical incidents in communities or complex change situations, it has helped me tremendously. And I'm hoping that this will help you too. So when I was in criminal justice and working directly 30 years ago with young people in the criminal justice system, compassion kept me safe. I never once had to question my safety because of my application of compassion when working with individuals. When I was navigating crisis, critical incidents in communities, whether it be riots or whether it be Peace Week events, I used compassion with communities. And what that meant is it meant that it brought resolve. It reduced the conflict and it brought resolve. So it's helped me again. As Amanda alluded to, some of my roles within senior positions, what it done when I was leading these organizations is compassion helped me. It elevated the morale amongst the staff teams, not only elevated morale, but it increased productivity and brought great results amongst the teams. So for me, it's really clear why there's a journey of compassion. And I'm going to hopefully take you through some of the examples and share my experience with you around why it's great for you too. So what are the myths around compassion? Let's look at some examples of where it's really worked. And these organizations you may be familiar with. Some are organizations and some are individuals. So let's just have a quick look at what those are. So in England, we had Gareth Southgate, who was the England football team manager, and he led his team to the Euro 2020 Cup, the first manager since 1966 to be able to do that. And he led his team with compassion. He listened to their individual needs and he empowered all of them. We all know about Jacinda Ardern, the former New Zealand Prime Minister. There's lots out there in the media and online about the fantastic work that she done leading her country. Satya Nadella from Microsoft, through her compassionate leadership, she enabled Microsoft's net worth to grow from 300 billion to 1 trillion. Okay, so some real clear examples. Leeds, a city in the UK, is compassionate Leeds, and they are doing so much work. They have their awards every single year and are encouraging all organisations to think about compassion within their work. And the same with NHS Wales, as well as NHS England. NHS Wales, are looking at partnering with organisations such as Samaritans to make sure that compassion is embedded and it is bringing great results. But what I want to do is highlight and bring your attention to the Harvard Business Review, which highlights at the bottom that of 1,000 leaders that were surveyed, 91% said compassion is very important for leadership, and 80% would like to enhance their compassion but do not know how. Okay, so compassion is clearly a hugely overlooked skill in leadership training, and there is a document that you can refer to called Power Can Corrupt Leaders, but Compassion Can Save Them. So do research and have a look at the Harvard Business Review, and it can take you through all of the work and the research that has been done around compassion. There's a prison in Cyprus where the leadership have used compassionate leadership to embed change. And so therefore, it brought some really great results in terms of reoffending. The reoffending rate dropped to 15% from over 50% under a more punitive system. So I think, there's some real clear examples of some household names that you're familiar with and how compassion has worked for them. So let's think about what a compassionate organisation is. It's an organisation that is considerate. We're going to think about that word considerate just for a moment. But it's an organisation that is considerate, that takes positive action for sustainable development and has people at the heart, at the core of its foundation. It's a business where the leaders, workforce, clients and stakeholders are at the heart, feel valued and work collaboratively with a focus on providing better outcomes for all, including the business. And a compassionate organisation is really about thinking about all the stakeholders, everybody, as well as the business. Yeah, there's so many models out there where it's just business led. It's thinking about, the profit, what's behind that. But really, a compassionate organisation is considerate to all, as well as the planet, And that is really, really important. Okay, so you got your definition there. So what's happened is the way to make this easier for yourself and your organization is to really think about the 4 Ps. And you'll find that throughout my presentation, I'm very keen on the 4 Ps and Cs as well. So Ps and Cs, it's an easy way for you to remember this terminology around compassion. So what are those 4 Ps that you really need to focus on in your organization? And they are purpose, people, planet, and profit, or performance, depending on if you're a not-for-profit. This is what's going to help you to become a leading business. There are so many strategies out there. Leaders are confused with which way to go, where to turn, how to prioritize. But I can assure you that if you think about these 4 Ps, you are definitely going in the right direction to ensure that your business is a leading business and future-proofed. Okay? Purpose. What are your vision, mission, and values? When I do this work around compassionate organizations, usually leaders then have to go back and revisit their mission, vision, and values. And when we think about their values, we know that employees are more likely to want to be a part of an organization that is value-based, immersed in values. And that is a better option for them over pay. Okay, so this is really, we've seen the Great Resignation and what that actually means. And so really think about what are we trying to do as an organization? What difference are we trying to make in the world? And is it really needed? When we think about people, we put people at the fore. People are at the fore, and we have nothing without people. Everything is entrenched with stakeholders. And when I show you, when I continue on and show you the next slides, you will see how people and stakeholders are embedded within every single piece. Now we're talking about compassionate organizations, but in a moment, I'm going to talk about compassionate leadership, which is really this one of the 4 Ps. Let's think about the planet. What are we doing around sustainability? Because if you do not consider the planet, you're not going to be able to future-proof your business. When we think about sustainable development, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, you really need to think about the planet and sustainability, what products your organization is using, carbon footprint. Yeah. On top of the products, it could be, everybody can take their part. It doesn't have to be an SME or a corporate. Even if you're a private company, you can play your role. Maybe not necessarily on a huge scale, but you can still be involved in recycling or thinking about the products that you're using. Are they environmentally friendly? Yeah. So this is what we need to think about. When the pandemic was there, we all got caught up in thinking about supply chains and how it actually impacted us. So these are the things that we need to think about in terms of future-proofing our organization. And when we think about profit, yes, it's important. Businesses need to be able to make profit to survive. However, it's how much of it you put back in, and is it balanced out with the purpose and the people? Because quite frankly, I've seen where leaders of organizations have been removed out of their position, not based on their performance, but based on their values. So everything is becoming very, very value-led and people-orientated. We've got to have those things at the core and think about, when we're making decisions, how does it impact everything? And if you put purpose, people, and planet together, it will result in the profit, because that is where the richness is within the organization. And I put the other P, which is about performance. And part of the reason why I put that P in there is because obviously you've got not-for-profit and thinking about performance-led. Okay, so that could be the outcome too. This is the combination to future-proof your business. If we had another pandemic, is your organization in a position to sustain moving forwards. We saw what happened in the pandemic. Organizations had to downsize, move location, move away from bricks and mortar offices, hybrid working, and downscale. They had to pivot and U-turn in order to survive. And so this framework here, this compassionate organization framework, a model, will help you sustain, especially when we think about sustainable development that has to be in place by the deadline of 2030. Now, what I've also done is I've helped you by bringing some leading strategies together. And I'm just going to take you through some of those leading strategies. And they are DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I've moved away from the word equality. It's really about equity. It's not equal opportunities, but equality of opportunity. That's where we need to move. And when we think about DEIB as one of the primary policies, it's filled with purpose, people feature, planet is in there, and profit. They all are featured within DEIB. Okay, so ESG because the planet, and DEIB is about people's beliefs, etc. ESG, environmental, social, and governance agenda. We know that if you are an organization that is applying for funding, you are more likely to become successful in this current climate if you have an ESG agenda. Because ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So there you are. Like I said previously, all of these are underpinned by people, stakeholders. The S for social in ESG outlines that. The E for environmental, again, you've got to think about the wider piece and how you're governing your organization, how decisions are made is very, very key and crucial. When we had the pandemic, we didn't really have many organizations thinking about succession planning, business continuity, contingency planning. And in my world around criminal justice, specialist education and care, it's mandatory. You can't move unless you have a business continuity plan in place. So really we need to be thinking about those areas straight off, first of all. So corporate social responsibility, CSR, again, it's not just about the people within your organization. It's about the extended people. It's about the families. What are you doing more socially? What is your responsibility socially? I remember years ago where we used to have a bank that used to come in and do our gardens on our site. That was part of their CSR. Gone are those days. They have to be more meaningful, more purposeful. And again, it fits back in under purpose. And we also have the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, which you should all be familiar with. There are 17 of those that need to be met by 2030. And I know that the work of Agile Nation has been around reduced inequalities, and we need to be thinking about all of those 17. So which ones are the main priority ones for your organization? Because there will be a thread that runs through. So the real reason why I'm showing you this slide is to show you how some of those core strategies link in as the primary. And if you focus on those, it captures all of them, from the financial piece of it to the people piece of it, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. All of it is captured under there. And in relation to Wales specifically, Wales has the first law of its kind with Sustainable Development Law for Wales. It is the well-being of future development, well-being of future generations. And that act came into place in 2015, and it is the first of its kind. And that act actually touches on all of these areas that I've outlined for you right now. Okay, so as I mentioned before, it's all about the P's and the C's, and here are some C's that you really, really need to embed within your compassionate organization. They need to be commonplace in everything that you are doing. It will help to improve the culture positively. And so what we've got is community is 1C, because Deloitte of six Deloitte talks of 6 C's, and I won't list all the 6 C's, but actually, when I think of compassion, I think of another 2, and they are community and communication. Because throughout my work in relation to change, these are the 2 areas that are very weak and need to be prioritized. Community. Think of community in everything. And when I say community, I'm talking about stakeholders. Where can they be involved? Every decision that you make as an organization impacts others, internally, externally. So think about community. Okay, I recently came across an example where an organization had been in this community for about 40 years. They had a big building, had lots of staff based there. But because of the pandemic and because of subsequent business priorities, they removed that building. They no longer had that building and moved to hybrid satellite hotspots in other places. Now, the community saw that because they were a key employer within the within the community, within the local area for 40 years. And so even though they're moving to the hybrid model, what they've done is they've forgotten about the impact on the community. Okay, so think about all stakeholders. And when we think about communication, so many times I've seen communication that goes completely wrong. The timing of it, the lack of it, who says it, who will have the biggest impact, what is said, how we're going to communicate that. Accessibility, communication is so key. And part of the reason why it's so key is because there's not enough of it. I see so many organizations start off with great communication and it peters out. When I was in an organization, I used to put out communication every single Monday morning. I didn't know who was seeing it and who wasn't seeing it. But what I did know is one morning I did not put it out. And I had so many people emailing me saying, where was my communication? So sometimes, you put these things out and you think, well, actually, are people paying attention? But yes, they are. So community and communication. I'm not going to get too deep into the other areas, but co-production, co-creation and consultation. Again, asking for people's input, making sure that they know, that we want to make them feel valued. Their input is valued. And as leaders, quite often, they go off and make decisions without consulting the relevant people. But I've got a really revolutionary idea. And that idea is to just ask people. Because if you ask them, my experience is that they'll happily tell you. And then as a leader, you don't need to be, going for things in the dark. You can be clearer, you can engage and be much nearer. And as a leader, it helps your work because your work actually becomes easier. So, as a compassionate organization, I've gone through some of the basic steps. I've really given you a definition of what that compassionate organization looks like, what it feels like, how considerate it is to people and the planet. Okay, and that in turn will have an impact on your bottom line and your profit as well as your performance. I've outlined some of the key areas, the 4 Ps: purpose, people, planet, and profit. I have given you some compassionate Cs to work with, as well as highlighting some of those key strategies that you need to pull together, as well as the Wales law, the law in Wales, in 2015 that came into effect in 2015. If you consider all of those together, you will touch upon all of the areas that are needed: ESG, DEIB, CSR, and SDG. Okay, so I did give the definitions in there. So let's just think for a moment about organization and the next steps for the organization. Identify your areas of strength and those in need of further development within your organizations. What are the priorities out of everything that I've said so far? Is there an area that is weaker than others that needs further development? Feel free to use the communication links, the chat, put some things in there. If it resonates with you, do share. Always look to embed those compassionate C's effectively, because the compassionate C's, it's almost like a compassionate impact assessment. Yeah, this is what we need. Okay. Crucially, are you an organization that values their staff, or one where staff feel valued? Now think about that one for a moment, because there is a real great difference between the two. You want staff to feel valued. So it doesn't matter if I'm an organization that values my staff. If you, as a member of my organization, don't feel valued, then it means absolutely nothing. Okay? And some of the quick wins that you can do is adopt, some real principles around having an open door where people can make sure that they can access you. Staff meetings, review the agenda, look at the end, maybe add an agenda item on the end that is about some reflective practice. What have you learned collectively as a team? Or some open discussion. These are some real quick wins. A staff satisfaction survey. When I work with larger organizations, quite often they haven't consulted with the employees, and quite often as leaders, you can think one thing, but actually it's completely different to what's happening on the ground. And if you're familiar with the work of Edgar Schein, you'll be familiar with organizational culture. So there are some real quick wins there. But before I bring Amanda back to conclude this session, I just want to kind of round off by giving you my quote, which is: to future-proof your business, become a market leader as well as respected and trusted brand, you must build a sustainable organization. Being a compassionate organization ticks all of those boxes and more, because there are no losers with compassion, only winners. Okay, so I've given you examples of my own experiences with compassion over 30 years. It was a common thread that came throughout. I've given you examples of leading organizations and individuals that some of us know because they're household brands. And so the evidence is there. I've pulled all of it together to make sure that you're able to future-proof and embed change with compassion. And on that note, I just want to bring Amanda back before we talk really about compassionate leadership. Let's just conclude this section just for a moment. Thank you, Amanda.
Oh, thank you, Toni. That was really insightful, and there's some practical tips that I've picked up. And I love the idea of that compassionate impact assessment. We're used to looking at equality impact assessment, so it's just that taking that further and deeper. And something that I was thinking about was very relevant to Huarai. We've just published some research on working experiences of women over 50. And one of the findings was that women over 50 often feel invisible and overlooked by employers, government and society generally, feeling that they face barriers to remaining in work. And then I was thinking, well, this compassionate piece really might be something that could really help. What are your thoughts around that, Toni?
Well, the thing about it is, and I just want to highlight the fantastic work that KaiTeg have done around Agile Nations, because it really does highlight, the need to reduce inequalities. And when we're thinking about older women and, when we're thinking about what compassionate organizations should be putting in place, they need to be put in policies, and that comes under DEIB or workforce development, around things around the menopause, for example, and how it can have an impact on older women. They need to really be thinking about, how to embrace, mothers that are working at home, and remote working with little children, that are around them, how they're going to be able to accommodate this flexible working. When we think about diversity in leadership, Amanda, we really want to make sure that the people that are around the leadership table are very diverse to bring those views. And quite often I hear people saying, is your board representative? But for me, it's not about, is your board representative? It's about, is your board representative of who you should be, not currently are serving? So if you're serving the wrong people, then your board is going to be representative of that. So really, we need to look a little bit deeper in there. And there's some key things around recruitment as well. And when it comes to recruitment, we've got to think about the language that we're using. Do people know that there is specific language that attracts males over females? When we use the wording around, drive, competition, there's surveys, there's research that actually confirms that it attracts more males. And if we use things like compassion and nurturing, this encourages women as well. So just really getting organizations to think about their policies wider and how to be more diverse and get all those boxes ticked, but not in a performative way, in a proactive way, Amanda.
That's great, thank you. And then the other thing that was really resonating with me then is the links to the well-being of future generations. And you mentioned that, and you explained that, how if organizations are looking at compassion, that's going to really help them work towards the goals of the ACT there.
Absolutely. So important. And that's really pulling together the compassionate organizations. And there's some quick wins there as well, which hopefully we can touch on after I've gone through some compassionate leadership.
Looking forward to the next section now to see what we can do, as I say, as individual leaders. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, and see you in a moment.
I'll be back soon, yes.
Okay, so let's just start thinking about some compassionate leadership now. Compassionate leadership definition is an intuitive, heart-led, action-orientated approach that builds real human connection and outcomes, not only for the individual, but for the organization and culture. Okay, so it's really, like I said earlier on, it's not sympathy. It's not the same as sympathy, pity, or empathy. We can say, yes, I understand. I was looking at an organization's, vision and values, recently with them. And a lot of the things that they'd written were about, if we see something, we will challenge it this way and challenge it that way. And I said, well, there's an awful lot of challenging going on. But actually, what action are you taking as a result? So it's really about that follow through. And when you're working with individuals, it's about saying to them, I understand. How can I help you? What is the best way for me to support you? What do you need from me? Deloitte talks about the 6 C's and always being curious. So let's put ourselves in that mindset of being curious and intuitive, heart-led, action-orientated approach that builds real human connection and outcomes. And that piece really is about building relationships, because so many people talk about difficult conversations. Well, actually, the more stronger the relationship is, the easier those conversations become. It's just another conversation, and it's all about social capital and human capital. So when we think about compassionate leadership, to apply this, one of the things I think about in relation to change is really looking at the individual needs of individuals. And what do I mean by that? When we're thinking about change, so because I want you to change and I tell you to change, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. Everybody wants change, but nobody wants to change, because it starts with us. Rather than looking at others, let's start with our own self first. And there are 5 key areas that I'm just going to touch on very briefly, just to put compassionate leadership into context, because it will help you with your compassionate leadership. I have my own leadership change model, And that leadership change model has 5 areas. They are 5 pillars. They are behavior. Think about the behavior of that individual. How does that need to be addressed? Is it something that, they had through childhood? Innate, taught, learned, and habitual behaviors. They all represent something different, and they all have to be unpicked differently. Sometimes behaviors can't be unpicked. So let's think about how we apply the behavior to something positive rather than negative. Learning, kinesthetic, audio and visual learning. How does this person take on board learning? Because doing an online presentation, not everybody's going to be engaged. Some people like to learn differently. Let's think about environment. How does environmental factors have an impact on somebody changing? Does working in a hybrid scenario or remote working from home, is that the change that's needed? So when we're thinking about changing an individual, we need to go deeper. The next one is network. And my husband has a saying, and he says that if you hang around a barber's long enough, you will end up getting your hair cut. Even if you have no hair, you're still going to have a shave or something. And that is representative of the network and the people that are around you. And the last one is self-awareness. Where are you at in your own journey of self-awareness? So if you're leaders watching this webinar today, what I want you to do is really think about those 5 areas. And when you've thought about those 5 areas, really apply them to individuals. And then your compassionate leadership can come into play. So once you've identified those individual needs, this is your compassionate leadership. I once had a client that, and while we're applying compassionate leadership, it's so important to make sure that all of the protected characteristics are included. We consider those. Let's make sure that we consider all of those. How are we tending to the needs of individuals? I say that if you really want to get to the bottom of what's important for an individual, ask them what's important to them. Because as leaders, we always think about what's important for them. It's important that they get paid on time, that they have their break on time, that they have 30, 35 days annual leave. But what's important to them could be the fact that they've just gone through a divorce or other aspects. It's their birthday or something else personally is happening for them. So important to and important for in equal measure. And that's my tip, my little bit of fairy dust for you today. So let's move on with some compassionate leadership. Now let's get to grips with our valve principles. Again, this is the leadership compassion impact assessment for you as an individual leader. These valve principles were named valve principles intentionally because they need to be at the heart of your leadership. This is not performative. We switch it on. It is really just a check of how we are doing. The valve is the beating heart of your leadership. And remember, think about that, the position of the heart within our bodies. It's the key organ. And think about that as compassion in your organization. It's so important that we are visible, attentive, that we listen, that we value, and engage. Make sure that they underpin all of your work as a compassionate leader. I will give you a couple of examples. I won't dwell on this too long. But being visible. How visible are you as a leader within your workplace? Because actually, gone are the days where we can hide behind stacks of paper, sneak in through the back door and sneak out. The last to come and the first to leave. We need to be seen within the organization. And I can give you an example of when being visible has really, really helped me and brought the results. I was in an organization I was catapulted in to help the situation. They were going through some dramatic change. It was very complex. There was no managers there. They'd either been sacked or, put on suspension. But yet they had a regulatory visit pending. The inspectorate were going to be coming. Now, I got to work. I put all these practices in place, all these strategies, etc. And I was ticking all of the boxes. However, there is a leadership category. And I felt that as the only person that was in leadership, how am I going to pass this particular category? So what I done was I assembled, a couple of mentors externally, people that were outside of the organization that could help me. And I put them on the organization chart, but as external. I decided to put my pen down because there was nothing more that I could do in the office with my pen. I put my pen down and I got to work. And when I say I got to work, I started going to meet the people in the organization. I got to know them, asked them questions, connected with them, knew their names. And that is what saved that organization from getting an outstanding inspection. Okay. And that was just because I was being visible. And so there's many ways that you can be visible within your organization, whether it be a first day induction, be visible. Yeah. Introduce yourself to the staff, get your leadership team to introduce themselves. Being attentive, pay attention to what your staff need. Do you always think about what's best for you, or do you think about what's best for them? Pay attention. An example was I went into an organization and there was a person that was in there, and actually he'd never come to the attention of leaders before. He'd never been given opportunities, and he was making derogatory remarks on my second day. And I thought, how am I going to deal with this? We had a conversation and we sat down for an hour, and I began to realize that he'd never, ever been offered an opportunity that he felt he deserved. And I thought, I'm going to give you a chance. My money's going to be on you. And I continued to mentor him over the weeks. And he turned out to be one of my best members of staff because we put a program in place that he was going to lead on. So not only did I need it for the work that I was doing within that organization as part of that change, but I needed him to be on board because he was very influential too. Now was not the time to be taking up any other matter. So just by being attentive, he turned out from my worst to my best member of staff. Okay, let's pay attention. Listen. Are you listening? When a member of your team speaks to you, do you listen to respond or listen to learn? Okay, when I was younger, I used to repeat myself an awful lot. And I later discovered that the reason why I'd done that was because I wanted the person I was speaking to acknowledge what I'd actually said. I want you to say, Toni, I've heard you, and demonstrate that you've heard me. So really, let's pay attention. Let's listen to what somebody is saying. I've touched on value as well, around, do your staff feel valued? Because it's important. And when was the last time that you asked them? So get ready with that staff satisfaction survey. And when we think about engaging, everyone engages differently for different reasons. Are you clear on what that engagement is? When I, done a piece of work recently with a leader of an organization, he said to me, well, actually, I'm going to go away and I'm going to think about disability access, wheelchair access in all of my buildings. And I said, well, why would you want to go away and do that project yourself? Because you do not have lived experience. You're always going to miss something. So what you need to do is do this co-creation, co-production piece with community and communicate and even consult, okay? And ask somebody that has that lived experience, because I can guarantee you that their input is going to be 100% better than the lack of your lived experience, okay? So that is a demonstration of how engaging somebody can work for you. And that is, moving to action, recognizing the difficulties of others and moving to action. Okay. And on that basis, please do think about your valve principles and keep them at the heart of all of your work. And our next steps in terms of the leadership piece as an individual leader. Identify where you are on your own journey with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Where are you? Are you challenging your own beliefs, or are you waiting for them to be challenged? Sometimes our own beliefs come from when we were younger, or an experience or an environment that we're in. Really take time out to explore that. Where are you at with your own self-awareness, with compassion for yourself as a leader? How resilient are you? Are you burning the candle at both ends? Are you taking some time out for your own self-care? Because that's where it starts first. It starts with you. And really think about some reflective practices that you can really be bringing into your work. So, whether it be a team meeting, just think about what worked really well for us, what didn't work so well, what do we need to think about more as we move on, so that you're always progressing as an organization. These are the practices that if you embed them, they will help you to become, a leader in your industry. Yeah. So give an example. So these are some questions that you can put in just tomorrow. Automatically, if you're having a supervision, you can just ask a simple question, which is, give an example of when you've used compassionate leadership in your work. And if you're not leading me, and I know that I'm going to be asked that question, every time I'm going out and delivering, I've got that in my mind on top of my valve principles. These are things that you can start to do straight away tomorrow. The other question is, how can I make you feel valued? A lot of people think about money as pay me more money as value. I know what the constraints are like when you're a budget holder and in terms of finances for organizations. The finances are not always there, but you can value people in other ways or make them feel valued in other ways. So ask them, how they can feel valued. And I'm just going to round off by saying, in terms of leadership next steps, the only qualification required to lead with care and compassion is to qualify as being human. Okay. And I'm just going to leave it at that for a moment, and really to encourage all of you within your organizations to be a leader in your industry and make sure that you're ready. If we had another pandemic, are you ready? Is your organization ready? If you take on board some of these tips that I've given you around compassion and your compassionate journey, you're bound to be a winner, because there are only winners in compassion. And I just want to leave by saying that because it hasn't been done before, it doesn't mean it's impossible. So why don't you be the first? Yeah, I gave you examples of some of those leaders that are leading the way with compassion. Somebody had to do it first, and they did. And in your industry, it could be you. And on that note, I just want to say thank you for spending the time with me. And let's bring Amanda back in and see if there are any questions that we can go with right now. Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Toni. Yeah, there's a couple of questions that I've got for you. And just for the audience, if you want to send some more questions in, there will still be time for those. So yeah, keep your comments coming, keep your questions coming. First one I've got for you, Toni, is if you've got a leader that's managing a remote team, because you talked about them being visible. So obviously with the way we've moved into a lot of hybrid working, some completely remote still, what can managers do there?
Well, I think that, first of all, I would say that it shouldn't necessarily be 100% remote. Every so often, bring your team together, in a visible space, and because it makes such a difference. And this is something that I've experienced based on consultation, working with organizations, that, they say, oh, we've done this survey and only these people responded, and so we're working on those people that responded. But what about those others that haven't responded. We need to dig deeper. And when it comes to visibility, try every so often to bring those people together. When you are doing that, one of the things that I mentioned was about open door. And when I was on site, I used to have an open door every Thursday between, 10 and 12 o'clock. And people would book in. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have a reason. You could just come and have a coffee, come and have a chat, come and have a dance or a sing. It didn't matter. We could have 10 minutes of you and me time, and that was accessible for everybody. So that was something that happened every single week. When we moved to remote, I actually started doing it on Zoom. So I let people know that if you want me, I will be here online between this time and this time. And if no one shows, I just reduce the screen and carry on with my work. If someone shows, the doorbell rings and I let them in. And I found that it actually still works. So those are the kind of things that person asking that question can consider: being available, being accessible, being visible in between at a certain time, because then people know that they can get hold of you, you're accessible, and it's the same as being visible, but really be attentive to them as well. So I hope that's helped a little bit, Amanda.
No, that really has. And that does actually, something we have done at Huawei Tech is we've had open door with senior leaders and board members, with HR. And I know I do it as well in terms of being a line manager, just having that sort of that time to just say, yeah, I'm here, even if it's just for that coffee. I've never said a sing or a dance though, but just that could work too, couldn't it? Did you ever have somebody come for a sing or a dance?
Absolutely, because I'm always singing and dancing anyway. So, I'm one of these leaders that my door is always open, and people will and music's playing. So people will walk past, say, hi, Toni, and I just say hi back, and I don't even know who it is, so that's me. So, it is actually a physical thing where my door is open. And we have a little sing or a dance, and then we get back to work.
Back to it. And those can be really valuable moments, can't they? When we're talking about compassion,
people need to know that you're an authentic person. You're a leader. You're being true to you, and there's no persona, there's no ego. Let's just bring that on. So being visible, being really present. A present leader is a real great leader. And I mentioned earlier on as well about, when you're bringing people in on an induction, I used to take 20 minutes out, introduce myself in an induction, and then in the afternoon, invite them to my office. And we used to have a pot of coffee or a pot of tea and just have a conversation. What are your aspirations? How many children have you got? Because then when I see them a week later in the corridor, it's, how are you getting on, Amanda? And I know that I'm going to get an unfiltered response. They're not going through layers of management to get to me. It's a real conversation, and I can get a feel. And if there is an issue, then I can say, go back to your manager. I'll speak to your manager, go back to them, and they'll deal with it. So I'm not undermining anybody either, which I think is really important.
That's great. And something that you actually said in that last response links to the next question about engaging with staff and staff engagement surveys. So you said sometimes those, maybe the same people are responding all the time. And actually, if leaders are having problems with that staff engagement survey piece, is there any tips around that? Or is it just... I'll leave you. Yeah.
We need to be curious. If we've got 60% of staff engaging on that survey, then really for me, I want to know what's happening, what's not working with the 40%. And so I want to explore that a little bit further. What were the teams that didn't engage? What can we do? Have some consultation, some communication, going back to the C's really, so really be curious why that is. Don't just leave it. They just didn't respond. Because quite often, when we've got scenarios and things were changing around hybrid and remote working, there were so many teams that felt that, well, we're just being ignored because we're operational, we're not office-based. No one cares about us. Do you see what I mean? So it's like, that's what works for them. And that's where the equity piece comes in. If you're office-based, hybrid working will work for you. But what's the scenario for those that are not office-based? have they got some kind of choice around something? Do you see what I mean? And
Yes.
I think it's really, really important to explore that group because, it's key.
Lovely. I think we've got time for one final question, and it's around leadership training. So the question is about if a leader wanted to update their training, really to bring in more compassion, is it kind of an added module, or is it to look at the whole thing? And I suppose, how do we get a quick win, a little bit of fairy dust on an existing program?
Okay, well, the good thing about the way that I see compassion is, whilst there are lots of compassionate programs out there, we've delivered a whole framework around it, and there's lots of scenarios that, lots of things that we can offer around that. The main thing is that the compassionate leadership, it can be entwined in it's complementary to, it doesn't have to be instead of any other leadership. And so there are specific models that you can entwine within that. It's delivering those things in a more human-centered, heartfelt way. So it's really to complement, but it can be also a standalone program too. And there's quite a bit out there around compassion and egos, and ego-driven leadership is not the way. But I hope that kind of has captured a little bit for you. But there's lots on offer in relation to compassion, and an extra module, yes, but I would say that it underpins a lot of other leadership practices.
Yeah,
and it's about being human. It's about being human. The whole program is about getting back in touch with your human side. The last slide that I shared was about, it's really about the only qualification that's required is to be human. Yeah. So let's just get back in touch with that piece of us, the human piece, not the bit that we switch on and off, because being human is always there. Yeah. And it's that side of it. And the other bit is things like, using your power to empower others, not holding on to it because the way you become more powerful is by empowering others with your power. And how often do we say to people to reach out if you need some help? But when we lead with care and compassion, we take responsibility as compassionate leaders to reach in too. So you listen with your eyes and your ears. Sorry.
Lovely.
You've got
I didn't want to interrupt you there, because there was some wonderful, lovely insight there, and using your power to empower others, I think is a great way there. I was just, I think that's great. And as I was listening, I was thinking of some really real quick wins that you could thread through existing programs of leadership there. So thank you. That's absolutely great. Now, we have sadly run out of time. It has been a wonderful session. I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure for you to join us.
No problem. It's been great, and thank you all for those that have been joining us, and hopefully you can watch it back on the replay and feed your comments in, and do get in touch with Kaiteg if you need some help within your organisation around, the gender inequalities piece, and always happy to help people on their compassionate journey too. Thank you so much for having me, Amanda. Appreciate all the work you're doing.
That's great. Thank you. And just to follow up on what Tony's saying there, please do get in touch. If anything has interested you today, you'll see at the bottom of this slide, there's a post at whereitag.com. That's a good place to get your initial inquiry. And one of our business development managers can have a chat to you about your needs, anything that's specific to you, to see how we can help. And yes, this is going to be available on replay, so please do share it with friends, family, business contacts, spread it far and wide. And thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.